Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are on this vast planet that we live in. I'm your host, Rodney McGillvary, and this is Ancient Mysteries Revisited on WELT 95.7 FM in Fort Wayne, Indiana, coming to you every Mondays and Wednesdays at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and streaming live at www.acpl.info/welt. Also, you can find me on the Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Ancient Mysteries Revisited, and look us up on YouTube at Ancient Mysteries Revisited. Today we got an interesting guest coming from Arizona in the United States of America, Jeff Woolwine, who specializes in petroglyphs and UFOs. He's done a lot of research and analyzing of the petroglyphs found on the rocks over in Arizona, and he's sighted a lot of UFOs in the sky above his own home over there. So I look forward to talking to him, and let's not waste any more time. Let's bring him on.
Hello?
Hey, Jeff. This is Rodney.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Oh, not too much. Just enjoying the afternoon. How about yourself?
Cool. Just pretty much the same. It's still morning over here.
What time is it over there right now?
Almost 11.
Ah, so you're getting right into the afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're having a great morning, my friend.
Yep, thank you, man.
Well, let's get right into it, Jeff. If you want to, give our listeners a little rundown of who you are as a researcher and what you do and how you got into the petroglyphs.
Okay. Well, you know, I was born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a native, and I've always, even when I was a kid, I've always seen things in the sky here in Phoenix as far as lights and orbs and just weird stuff, but things really didn't start hitting me until like the summer of around 1999, maybe 2000, when I started seeing these things again, when I really started paying attention. Because, when you're a kid, you're just like, oh, whatever, that thing was cool, but whatever, you're a kid. So, but now when you grow up and you start seeing more and more of these things, you come to find out, look, these things have always been here. They seem to be following me around. So
now, did you see these on a constant basis since you were a kid, or was there like periods of time where you didn't really see any, and then all of a sudden you saw some again?
Well, that is hard to say. I'm sure that they have always been in the sky there. It's just I haven't been, really paying attention. Just like, for instance, when I was playing football with my dad, I threw I noticed his aura right behind his head up there in the sky, and I was like 11 or 12 years old then, and then like maybe a few weeks later, I see this light in the sky, and I'm telling my friends about it at school. Hey, did you see that light over there? So it really wasn't, I'm not sure if I was, just not paying attention, enough to notice them. But yeah, I do remember seeing them when I was a kid. So I'm sure that they were following me around this whole time. And then I just now started within the last 20 years following them back, and started watching them back, and trying to figure out what these things are. I read many books about the subject. I've seen many other, these so-called sky watchers, and I just none of it really seemed to match until I found these petroglyphs from the Native American Indians that actually depict what we're seeing in the sky today.
Interesting. How'd you come across these petroglyphs for the first time?
It's interesting. I remember seeing a light here in Phoenix, probably 1999, the year 2000, somewhere around there. And out here in the city of Mesa, that's on the east side of Phoenix, Arizona. I remember seeing the light there. And, I moved out of the valley for a while. And then I came back to the valley and specifically to hunt these things down and to find out, what exactly is going on here. And during my research, I happened to find this Native American who was on one of the public access channels out here in Phoenix, Arizona. And he worked for the city of Phoenix, and he was doing a tour up here on South Mountain. And he was explaining on what the petroglyphs mean. Now, at the time, I remember the news just a few days ago had captured some lights on the west side, the original 1997 Phoenix lights. They caught the lights in 2004 again on the west side of Phoenix, Arizona. And I remember seeing a little piece of a news clip of that. And then later on, I ended up seeing Dave, the guy on the Native American, the guy on television, talking about the petroglyphs. Now, there was this guy on the tour, and he was asking Dave, he goes, hey, it looks like this man here is looking up at something in the sky. And Dave says, oh, yeah, that's part of what the interpretations here is, that our ancestors saw and recorded things in the sky. And boom, that just set it off. That set the whole thing in motion. I was like, wait a minute, we got strange lights in the sky. Now we have strange carvings on the mountains out here. There has to be a connection.
Did Dave mention any of his own personal background and history regarding these petroglyphs? Like, did he come across these as a child being raised and everything?
Well, we'll get into that a little bit later. Yes,
Okay.
when I finally ended up meeting him. Yeah, so I remember seeing him on television, and so and then I ended up going. I moved to Mesa because I saw the thing on the news that the lights were back on the west side, but I knew before I moved that I was seeing lights on the east side. So I figured the east side would probably be better. So I moved to Mesa to try to capture these lights. And it didn't take me long. Through the whole summer of 2004, I was filming these Phoenix lights on the west side excuse me, on the east side of South Mountain. Now, they did not go over the city. There was no crafts involved. There's no technology in these things. Going into this, I'm thinking, oh, because, I was outside March 13th, March 13, 1997. And matter of fact, I was right there next to a mountain where so many people were reporting something flew over the sky. I didn't see anything. I was out there. And to this day, we find no evidence of any kind of spaceship going over the city. The only evidence that we do find is lights on the west side of Phoenix, Arizona. Now, still going into this, I'm thinking spaceships, crafts, aliens, little green men from Mars.
Right.
But now that I'm more into it now that I understand what's really here, I learned over the last 15 years that these things are not spaceships, that these things are living entities. These things are creatures. And technology has no reference at all in these things. And
that's an interesting concept that most people, I don't think, have even heard of, that the craft itself is not a technical or not a mechanical craft, but a physical entity.
Right. Yeah, and that's the problem that that I'm that I ran into because I was the first one to ever bring this up to the UFO community back in 2005 when I was doing the pilot for the UFO Hunter show, and then later did the show on the History Channel in 2007. Was that these things were not spaceships? They're not crafts. These things were living entities. And this is the reason why even today we cannot find one credible video, one credible photograph of a spaceship or a craft. The only thing that's credible are lights in the sky, orbs, and now we're coming to find out that these things like to take the shapes of serpents, like Quetzalcoatl, flying worms, flying crosses, things like this.
Now, what do you think of the whole Roswell craft? Do you think that was a hoax?
Yes, I think it was all a part of actually when you really study that, because I've studied it so many times and I've looked into the evidence, that it was really a space, a satellite to spy on the Russians that crashed out there. And to cover it up, the government let everybody think that it was a spaceship that crashed out there. That's the biggest cover up. Everyone thinking that it was a space alien craft, when actually it was a satellite built to spy on the Russians. And so they just let that story roll. It's interesting. We find no evidence, and that's the problem. See, I go with facts. I go with evidence. I go with things that we can prove. Okay,
right.
I don't
yeah,
go
that's
on
the
hearsay.
most credible pieces of information are the facts.
Yeah, well, I don't go on hearsay. I go on proof, on photographs, on videos that we can analyze. And this is the reason why the petroglyphs are so credible, because this is history. This is history now. All right. When you film a flying snake above South Mountain, and then you can go up on South Mountain and see the prehistoric carving of a flying snake in the sky, you know that this is credible. When you talk to somebody that has no information, when you talk to somebody that has no credible video or photographs of anything of a craft or little aliens or anything like that, then you got to take it as a grain of salt.
Now, do you know how long back?
Then it's not credible.
Do you know when these petroglyphs are dated? How far back?
Well, we can't carbon date the rock art. We can't carbon date the petroglyphs. But we can carbon date the pottery. Now, the pottery shards estimate between anywhere from 800 to roughly a little over 1,000 years old. And that's basically what the history tells us here.
Right.
So in
Plus,
2004,
you got the tales of the Indian tribes, and they probably have verbal records of these petroglyphs and how far they probably
right,
date back within their own culture.
right, and we'll go on to that. And so in 2004, I'm filming these lights and I'm making the news. And, the end result that we're seeing flares, 150 miles away. And you can clearly see that these things are not flares. These things are in the city, and they're not 150 miles away.
Right.
So I decided to, because all my information, all my studies are leading me towards the mountains. Mountains are the key here. Mountains is the source. And so these things are hanging around South Mountain out here. So let's move to the mountain. So in 2005, I picked up and I moved over there to the east side of South Mountain, and I lived there for almost 3 years. And within those 3 years, yes, I was starting to see these things during the day. And that's when I realized that these were not crafts, that these were not spaceships and little green guys from Apple's Story, but actually living entities, living beings. And as I started hiking the mountains, because I would see this thing land on South Mountain. I mean, I saw it, I videotaped it. I know it landed out there. I go out there to find some kind of evidence, but yeah, what do I find? I find a boulder with petroglyphs depicting the same thing that I saw in the sky.
Oh wow!
Now this led me back to Dave. So I called up Dave, and I got a hold of Dave, the guy I saw on the TV show. And I was like, dude, I saw you. I didn't tell him who I was. I didn't tell him what I was doing because, I was already in the news by that time. So my name started to become a little well known. But I didn't tell him what I was doing. And I was like, dude, I saw you on the Channel 8. I was like, I wonder if you can take me up there and show me the petroglyphs. So we agreed, and we went up there, and we spent about 2.5 hours up there on South Mountain. And he was telling me all kinds of things that in a way didn't make sense to me at the time, but 6 months to a year later, I understood what he was talking about, especially when it comes to the spirals. Now, the spirals represent doorways to the underworld, and he was explaining that these spirals are more likely over these cracks of the boulders. Now, these cracks in the boulders are the entrance points to the underworld for the spirits. Now, he wasn't saying crafts. He wasn't saying little green guys. He was saying spirits. Okay.
Okay.
And so he was also explaining that when the spirals end up, that there's a doorway in the sky. There's a vortex in the sky. In the sky. And he was saying, yeah, this is where they come and go from. Well, that made sense because, over the years, watching these things coming and going from South Mountain and going out there and investigating what was there, yes, I found spirals. I found the doorways, the reference point to where these things are coming and going from.
Now, these doorways in the sky, are they similar to what people say is a Stargate?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. That's when these things magically appear in the sky, the way we see them, today. These things just appear in the sky and then they disappear in the sky. They're going through like a tunnel and through like a vortex, if you will.
Okay.
And some people would say like another dimension. And so I was like, yeah, so he went into the history of the Hohokam. Now, the Hohokam means it's a Pima word. The Pimas consider themselves ancestors to the Hohokam. And the Hohokam means the people who are gone, the people who are missing, the people who got taken away. Because we don't know what happened to these people. They were simply here one day and then gone the next.
So was that like a tribe of the whole entire tribe of people got abducted at some point?
Now, that's very interesting, right? Now, the city archaeologist wants us to believe, well, they just simply migrated somewhere else. They got too hot and they migrated somewhere else. But yeah, we find no evidence of this. We find no reference point. We find no evidence on where they went. They were here one day. They were here for 1,000 years. Okay, they were masters of canals. And at that time, you can clearly tell that this wasn't a dried up desert 1,000 years ago. This was like a tropical like landscape.
Mm-hmm.
You can find evidence of the waterfalls and stuff like that throughout the landscape here in the Valley of the Sun, until in my opinion, because the stories kind of reference this, because yes, there was sacrifice out here, just like what we find in Mexico. This mountain is very holy and still is holy today. This is the reason why we're seeing these things coming and going from the mountains out there. And there was performing sacrifice to these phoenix lights, to these things that we see in the sky today. And the stories go on to say, the stories kind of reference that the reason why it got dried up here in this Valley of the Sun is because the sacrificing had stopped. And when the sacrificing stopped, it upset the tyrant god, the sun. And he sent his demons, I guess you could say, his devils, down and actually caught up these people and took them up into the sky.
Oh, wow.
Now, like I said before, the archaeologists say, well, they simply migrated somewhere else. But when you talk to the Native Americans here, who will talk to you about this, because some won't, some feel like this is like a type of taboo. It's not meant for us to understand where we actually come from, the true history of these things, because it is a scary thing. And they were taught throughout their generations to be afraid of these things. And rightly they should be, because these things are not here to help us. They're not here to cure cancer. They're in fact here to mislead mankind, as they did in the past. So shall it was in the time of the end, so shall it be in the time of the beginning. And so the beginning says that when the Hohokam first arrived here, these things came up out of the sand world. And some would reference them, especially like some of the Anunnaki texts. They would reference these things as the lizard people. Mm-hmm. And they lost their tails to look like everyone else. Now, they taught these people how to survive here in this valley. And in return, they worshiped these things as gods, until one day the sacrificing stopped, and then these things came down and picked everybody up. Now, we find proof of this on the carvings of the mountains out here, where we see these flying serpents, these flying orbs, these phoenix lights picking people up and carrying them off into the sky.
Real quick, though, so you said these serpent beings, they were here on the earth for a little bit of time, or even a substantial amount of time, until the sacrifices stopped? So they were living amongst the tribes?
Yeah, they were always, these entities have always been here. They were here before man.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that a lot of people fail to understand, because, a lot of people, they don't look into some of these biblical scrolls. When we look at the biblical scrolls, and when we look at some of the Babylonian scrolls, it tells us what these things are, where they came from, and why they're here in our skies today. But a lot of people just dismiss this and fail to look at this, because they think, oh, this is religion. Well, if we take religion out of these biblical scrolls and we look at it as a history marker for Earth, then we learn to understand that this is actually something that has always been here in the beginning of time. So when I started looking at reading some of these scrolls, it added up to the petroglyphs out here on South Mountain, and also the mountains around the valley.
Okay.
As far as, it's neat that we can read about it, and then we can go up on the mountains and we can actually see the prehistoric photographs of what it's talking about. Yeah, it's talking about giants. Well, let's go out there on the mountain. Yeah, well, there's carvings of giants. There's evidence of giants. It's talking about carvings of demonic creatures. Oh, yep, there's demonic creatures carved out here. And, there's talk about the Nephilim. Oh, well, yep, look at the carvings out here. This is what we're seeing. So this is proof positive. Yes,
it seems like there's a big resurfacing of this kind of research going on right now, where there's a lot of physical evidence in the world right now that kind of prove these old ancient stories.
Right. And then we have to look at, some of the biblical archaeology, because this is where my work comes into play, because I just don't go off of hearsay and altered photographs and videos. We go with what the history says these things are. We go with what we can prove. Okay, and what we can prove is the carvings. The carvings over 1,000 years old. The proof positive of the tombs that are out here on South Mountain. The proof positive of giants. Okay, we have stories of giants. Well, how? So a lot of people got to understand this. Well, how are the people like in Peru and Aruba talking about giants, and then we find giants carved, way over here on the other side of the world, when these two cultures of tribes didn't even know each other at the time, So how are they telling the same stories? And that's where we got to come into play. It's the same stories, maybe told a different way all over the world. So
that's what it seems like.
Go ahead.
That's what it seems like. Because there's evidence of these giant beings all over the world.
Right, exactly. And how is the same people, how are people telling the same stories when they don't even know each other?
Right.
There's no contact with each other, but yet they're telling us the same things.
Well, that makes you wonder too, because a lot of these old ancient temples around the world, across the oceans, they're all built in a similar formation along the same parallel line.
Absolutely. So why are they doing that? Well,
where are they getting these coordinates from, and why are they lining up so correctly? It possibly has to do with maybe these giants or these flying serpents are communicating with each culture around the world.
Well, here's the thing. What I learned over the years, so we have to ask ourselves, why South Mountain? Why are these things hanging around South Mountain? Well, South Mountain and some of the mountains around the valley was created by volcanoes. And what are these volcanoes sitting on? The ley lines, the energy lines, the fault lines. And in 2004, these lights were hanging out right above a power plant. That's borrowed down into the fault line here in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, these things were right over the power plant, absorbing the energy. Okay, and it's kind of interesting too, because in 2004, a power grid went down in the city of Phoenix, and it shut down houses, it shut down hospitals, it shut down business owners, it shut down a lot of people. For almost 3 weeks, and they had to pull in a whole new power grid from California on a 24-wheeler that almost took a month to get here. Okay, now I've seen photographs of these Phoenix lights over the Palo Verde nuclear power plant. Okay, that's outside of Phoenix out here, and I remember the news had told us that they're turning off the power plant, the nuclear power plant, and they're turning on these electrical power plants around the valley. Well, it just so happens that it attracted these things to these electrical power plants. Now, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? If I've seen photographs of lights over the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, and now they're hanging around the electrical grids, well, what would happen if something would, if they pulled too much energy off the nuclear power plant, that it would, probably collapse the core. And I think that's exactly what the government knew. So instead of leaving this nuclear power plant on, they turn on the electrical ones, so these Phoenix lights would be drawn to this type of energy, and that's exactly what had happened.
Yeah, that's interesting proof of what the government might possibly know.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, in 2004, I'm watching these things, and I'm not the only one watching them. I mean, there's airplanes in the sky, right? And I've filmed this. I've documented this. There's little white airplanes, and they'd circle a few thousand feet up in the sky, right above the power plant, right? These lights would pop in. As soon as these lights would come in, these airplanes would zoom in after them. And as soon as they got within a mile radius, these lights would disappear. The airplanes would come in, and they'd circle that area for a little while. Airplanes would go back into the sky, and then it would happen all over again. It was like a cat and mouse game through the whole time. And at first, I thought they were there to investigate them, but later on, I learned to find out that they were actually there to shoo them away.
That's
They're
what it
trying
sounds
to get
like, yeah.
them away from the area, right?
That is definitely a valid observation.
Right. And so after I was making the news, because I'm calling the news and I've got proof of the videos, and I'm like, dude, is anybody else seeing these lights out here?
Did anyone else see them?
Yeah, it took the news a few weeks to get back with me, and when I did, I did like 3 or 4 news stories that summer, and like I said before, the end result was, that we're all seeing flares 150 miles away, and which was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And after I was making the news, those airplanes, they started watching me now.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
we would all gather up right before, because I went out to Mesa Community College, and I went up on their bleachers, their set of bleachers for the football games and stuff, and I could see the whole city. So I sat up there the whole summer, and that's when I was overlooking the lights. I could see the lights perfect. So after I was making the news, these airplanes started following me all the way home. And right before we would leave, the airplanes would circle my apartment complex. They would follow us all the way to Mesa Community College, and they would watch me set up my cameras and tripods and stuff. The airplanes sometimes would zoom right next to me, and I could see the pilot. And he went up there in the sky, and then it started all over again. You know, the lights would come in, and here come the airplanes.
How long were they documenting you?
Oh, I don't know. It went on even towards when I went on. They still are. It's still going on today.
Okay.
It really got intense when I moved to the mountain in 2005. Now, not only was I seeing white Cessna airplanes, but now we're talking black helicopters. These black helicopters were hanging around, and I've documented all this.
Yeah. So.
And these black helicopters would come around and fly over the mountain, and they would hover over some of these doorways. And it was interesting too, because the whole 2.5 years I was living there, I discovered 7 doorways of where these entities like to come and go from this mountain. And in one day, this helicopter, he ended up checking the 7 doorways that I was watching, and some other doorways that I didn't even know about. So he was telling me where some of this stuff was. And then he positioned his helicopter right towards my window.
So yeah, it's like he wants you to expose these doorways.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because there were times when I don't think they wanted me there in the area at all.
Well, why do you think they were showing you those specific doorways you haven't seen yet?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't know that they were intentionally letting me know about them. I think they were doing it on accident.
Yeah, so maybe they knew that you knew, or maybe they thought that you already knew about those, and that's where they're just positioned to keep an eye on you at that point.
That could be. Who knows? I'm not too sure, but you know, there would be times I'd be outside and a black helicopter would zoom down in on me. You know, I mean,
wow. How close was it?
Like maybe about 800 feet up, maybe, give or take. I mean, he was up there, and then he kind of flew down, zoomed in, and then zoomed away from me. You know.
Did you ever feel threatened by these guys?
Huh?
Did you ever feel threatened by these guys?
Well, not threatened, but I did think that they wanted me to know that they were watching me. And every time, because every time I get a new sighting, every time I sit somewhere long enough, these things seem to come in the sky. And so every time that happens, when I start filming them and I start posting them, then here come these white airplanes again. Start circling my apartment, circling the airspace where I'm seeing these things at. So they know I'm watching them. They know I'm onto something. And so they're simply monitoring the people who are noticing what's going on here. They're watching the watchers.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it too, watching the watchers.
Yeah. And
the watchers are being watched as well.
Right, absolutely. So what are these things? Well, you know, in Genesis 6, it tells us that these things were thrown down, and even though, you know, it only talks about one mountain, Mount Hermon, there's evidence through other scrolls around the world that Mount Hermon wasn't the only mountain that these things were thrown upon. There were other mountains around the world that these things were cast upon, and South Mountain, this valley, was one of them. Mm-hmm. And it tells us that the people in those days treated these things as gods, and it led to their downfall. Now, this was the story, not only here on South Mountain, but the stories that we find all over the world, and the stories that we can document through the biblical texts and the Babylonian texts and the carvings on the mountains here. That these things have a past. They have a history, and unfortunately, the history isn't a very good one, because we have to ask ourselves, well, the Hohokam, they dealt with these Phoenix lights, they dealt with these things, and now they came up missing. So what does that say about our future? Because we're seeing these things in the sky now.
Mm-hmm.
So what is about to happen? So the Hopis say that we are in the fourth world. We're getting ready to enter the fifth. And every time we enter the fifth, or every time we enter a new world, such as the fifth that's about to occur, these things are here not only to help mankind, but to conquer and for them to worship these things once again. So that's basically what they're doing here. A lot of people are saying, well, how come they're not landing on the White House lawn, making contact with us? Well, because it's not time yet. All right, nobody knows when the end will come, but they know that the time is near. When you look at all these prophecies, you can see that we're at the end of days here. We're at the end of the fourth world.
Yeah, who knows if America will even be around during that time too, you know?
Right. And a lot of people are saying, well, I can't wait to be in the fifth world. I'm like, dude, yeah, you can, because, it's not going to be that pretty, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to be around in the fifth world, man. I tell you what.
It's just these people, they can't stand their own personal reality right now, so they can't wait till that dream, it almost seems like it might be a nightmare.
Right, man. And when you actually look at what's going on with these creatures in the sky, it's only a matter of time when the believers will be forced to worship these things, and the non-believers will be, well, they won't be alive. Let's put it nicely.
Right.
And,
well, somewhat of what you said too. You were bringing some biblical references to the table on about this about these sightings and that culture that disappeared, and maybe that's where some of these biblical people came up with the concept of the rapture, when these people just disappeared out of nowhere.
Yeah, in First Thessalonians, we read that we will be caught up. We will be caught up to meet the Lord in the sky to be judged. Well, is that what happened to the Hohokam? Because they were caught
pretty
up,
similar,
never to be seen again. So was this a type of rapture? Now, it doesn't say rapture in the Bible anywhere, but these priests want us to believe that First Thessalonians is the rapture. Well, okay, I guess we can go with that.
Or it might be a reference to what you're speaking of.
Absolutely. So,
and they were judged. You said that they stopped doing these sacrifices, which brought about their disappearance, and that was their judgment. Right,
absolutely. Now, the story goes on to say that there were survivors to this Holocaust, and they were afraid. Mm-hmm. And they hid in caves, and they watched what was going on. And they saw their people being taken away by these flying serpents, by these phoenix lights, by these flying crosses, by these demon entities in the sky. And they were terrified. And when it was all over with, they buried all their gold on the mountains here in Phoenix. And they covered them up in tombs. And the priests that were witness to this, the chiefs, if you will, mm-hmm. Noticed that what he did was wrong, that he upset the sun god, and he ended up sacrificing himself on the altars. And the rest of the people vowed never to live in this land again. They said that this land was cursed, and whoever was going to live in this Valley of the Sun again would eventually have to go back to war with these spirits of the earth and sky. So they buried their gold on the mountains here around the Valley of the Sun, and they went back to Mexico, never to return. And for 400 years, nobody lived in this valley. Now, there was tribes on the outskirts of this valley who was watching the Phoenix lights, who was watching these lights, who was watching these flying serpents, and they were afraid because they knew what this land was cursed, and they were not going back into this valley again, ever. Until 400 years later, when Jack Swelling and his people came in and saw all the precious farmland that was out here left by the Hohokam. Mm-hmm. And that's when it started over again. That's when the Phoenix started to rise from the formal civilization. But who is the formal civilization? The history says that the formal civilization interacted with, if you will, demons, and out became giants and sacrificing, and it wasn't a pleasant time. But the archaeologists are burying all this information. They do not want to tell people this.
Right, because
The
that's
first park
part of
ranger,
that's part of true human history, and they're trying to erase reality.
right, and the first park ranger, Charles Holbrook, he understood all this. He was the first park ranger between the 1930s and early 40s. And he actually knew about the tombs on South Mountain. He knew what was buried there. He knew about the spirits of the earth and sky. The Native Americans told him. They told him what the true history of Phoenix was. Now, he went off and he was telling people this, and he made little flyers explaining on how the mines were here, and how these spirits of the earth and sky were protecting the gold that has been buried in the tombs of South Mountain as they're waiting for the mines to return to claim it, to have things start over again. Mm-hmm. And he knew all this, and he taught this when he was alive and did tours. I do tours on South Mountain, and he was doing tours, and he taught the people exactly what was going on here. Now, after his death, all his information, everything that he accomplished was buried and tucked away for 80 years in the City of Phoenix Library government department.
Oh, wow.
And I accidentally discovered all this information because for a whole year, I'm going out there on the mountain. I'm like, dude, because I'm an archaeologist, I can spot something out of place a mile away, and I'm finding all these tombs, and I'm finding all these things that talk about giants, and I'm finding the evidence of the giants. I'm seeing these flying serpents in the sky, and I'm filming these things in the sky, and I'm seeing them being carved on the rocks out here. No one in history has ever done this before. No one in history has ever matched their sightings with the rock art here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I knew something was going on. I knew I was right, but where's the damn evidence? Where's the history of this? Where's the proof?
How did you accidentally stumble across his documents that he had tucked away in the government files?
Well, here's the thing. When I was up there, I finally went to the library a year later, trying to find some evidence. I was actually working on the CCC. Now, the CCC, the Civil Conservation Corps, they were part of the New Deal back in the early 40s under President Roosevelt. And these guys, this was the Depression, and these guys lived on South Mountain for a few years, and they destroyed a lot of the rock art out here, because once you start to understand the rock art, it tells you the true stories here. Mm-hmm. It tells you where the tombs are, and so they were destroying a lot of petroglyphs out here, and they were also doing a lot of mining. They pulled about $60,000 worth of gold and silver out of South Mountain. That's just through the mining.
So they probably had a lot of that area shut down then for a while they did that.
Right, and they built ramadas, they built picnic tables. They wanted to make it a family park, a family-oriented park. They wanted to clean up the mountain. And they figured, depictions of sacrifice, depiction of demonic creatures, and things like this just didn't make for a family outing. So they destroyed much of the glyphs, at least on the lower parts of South Mountain. Now, when you climb up higher on the mountain, then you get more of a story of what was really here, because no one was really up there. But I did find evidence that the CCC did climb real high to blow up some of these cliffs way high up on the mountain. And in my opinion, I think because it was talking about the tomb that was buried nearby. So once you start to understand the glyphs, that's when you can understand the history and find where all the tombs are.
Has anyone found these tombs yet?
Excuse me?
Has anyone found or located these tombs at all yet?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's Roman numerals. There's Roman numerals out here on some of these tombs, so somebody documented where all these tombs are.
Oh, okay.
And they made South Mountain a government park. So you can't go out there and start digging stuff up without getting in trouble and going to prison for a few years. Mm-hmm. So they purposely did that. They purposely did that because if I can find tombs, then so can a lot of other people. And that's what was really going on with Charles Holbrook. In Charles Holbrook's writings and his documents, he actually talks about some of the gold miners, some of the gold tomb robbers that he has actually chased away, because people are coming up here trying to dig up the gold. So while I was investigating the CCC, I decided to go to the library, and I went up to the government floor, and I asked them. I was like, "Okay, give me the folders on everything you have about South Mountain." And when they did, it was like this huge old folder, and as soon as I opened it up, boom, there was Charles Holberg. Boom, there's story of the Mayans. Boom, there's story of the Giants. Boom, there's story of the tombs. Boom, there's stories of the gold.
Oh, nice.
The gold, man, that is as high as the tallest saguaro cactus and as big as round as the sun. And I'm like, dude,
wow,
this is it. This is proof positive that I had discovered. And
you found some gold right then and there yourself.
80 years.
You found some gold within those files yourself.
Right, man, right. Yeah, I found some nuggets out there on South Mountain before. You know, I know where the gold is. I know where the tombs are, you know.
I mean, the files themselves seem like a bit of gold.
Absolutely.
Were you able to make any copies of those at the time or anything?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Everything is, you know, you can find some of the evidence on my webpage, on my website, some on my Facebook page, and you know, my first book, I wrote a book about all this. Once I discovered all this, and I knew I was right, and I was verifying all the facts, because this is not just hearsay. It's not just writing, all right, that someone's trying to make money off someone else, dude. This is proof positive of everything that hasn't been told in 80 years. It's photographs, it's true stories of the history of Phoenix, Arizona, and it actually takes the audience on a magical journey through time, and to understand what the petroglyphs really mean and understand what the petroglyphs are talking about.
Real quick, Jeff, what's the title of your book?
Phoenix lights are.
What's the title of your book, Jeff?
It's called Phoenix Light. It's called Phoenix Lights: Petroglyphs in the Sky.
Okay.
True Stories, Myths, Legends, and UFOs over Phoenix, Volume 1. Now, because I wrote this book, it's huge. It's huge. It's got tons of colored photographs in it, and the publishers decided to break it down into 2 books because it was so big. It's 15 years of research up into this thing, and it was so big they decided to make 1 book out of it. And so they chose to do the first book is the lost history of Phoenix, Arizona, and it talks about the tombs, it talks about the giants, it talks about what happened to the Hohokam and things like that. So, and I don't get any money from this. I haven't received not one dime out of the 20 years of research of my findings. I don't collect any money from this. I told the publishers to give all the money from the books to the kids in the foster homes here in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh wow, that's a very nice thing of you to do.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's not meant for us to make money off of. It's not meant for us to exploit. This is what's really here.
Well, I'm glad you think so, and I think that gives you a little bit more validity to your research as well, if you're not trying to make a profit.
No, I'm not. No, there's no profit here to be made. It's information. And if you can't get to the mountain yourselves, then I bring the mountain to you through the book. And that's the whole point. It's the whole idea to through this information, through all my 20 years of hard work on this, is to bring people back to the mountain, to take a second look at these petroglyphs, not just to take the word of somebody trying to sell movie tickets saying a spaceship went over the Valley of the Sun when no evidence of this exists, but actually look at the evidence, look at the history of Phoenix, Arizona. Bring it all back. Come back to the mountain.
And if you look at your website, you can even check out Jeff's website, which I'll post on the Facebook page in a little bit. He's got tons of photo evidence and proof of what he's found over there in Arizona. So yeah, continue, Jeff.
I just think it's fascinating and it's really fun, and that's the whole point. Is to, you know, just don't take my word for it. Go out there and investigate it for yourself. I've
been wanting to check out Phoenix for a while. I've yet to do so. I've had some friends and family that's been over to Phoenix, and they've come back with stories of how wonderful of a place it is. I've also heard that a lot of spiritual people consider Phoenix a very spiritual place to be. They call it a spiritual vortex. I guess they have a lot of healing attributes to the atmosphere there for some reason.
Well, that's cool. That's neat if they're able to pick that up. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to try to make my way over there sometime soon, hopefully within a year. Maybe me and you can meet up there and you can give me a little tour of the area and what you've been talking about.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. I do free tours out here, and it's about 2 hours long, and I show the tombs, and I show the petroglyphs, and I explain on how to read and understand the glyphs, and yeah, that'd be great, dude. That sounds wonderful.
For sure. Are you currently living up there on the mountain right now, or?
No, I moved away from South Mountain in 2006. It just got too crazy. I mean, it was a bad neighborhood living over there next to the mountain. So I had to leave, but I felt I gathered enough evidence, enough videos, to make my book with. And not only, now I learned a secret. I learned the secret of these things.
What's that?
The first year, it was neat. I saw that these things were here on certain seasons, on certain months. And the next year,
like the sightings, like the UFOs will be appearing during certain seasons. Okay.
Yes. It was a pattern. It was a pattern through the seasons, through the equinox and the solstice.
Oh wow!
Now this is a secret, right? That I discovered watching this mountain for almost 3 years, man, straight. I mean, I didn't leave this mountain at all. If something was going to get past me, I was either in the bathroom or I was sleeping.
Okay, so you're saying there's a pattern to the appearances, and it coincides with the precession of the equinoxes and the.
Right.
So there's something trying to be said there.
Right. It's the especially January, February, March, April, May, June, and July and August. Now, those seem to be the real hot times to see these things coming and going from South Mountain. Now, a lot of people, I moved. Right now, I'm currently in one of my childhood neighborhoods that I used to see the lights and the orbs at when I was a kid. Right to this day, I live within like a half a mile of the house where I first started seeing these things at. Now, these things are still here in the skies because all the people that has been following me on Facebook for the past year know that these things were coming up right up to me in the sky here, and I was filming them like crazy up until this last summer solstice. Mm-hmm. The summer solstice, they moved.
Oh,
They're
really?
gone. Yes, they went to the other side of the United States, to the other side of the world, because they're following the sun. They're following the fault lines. They're following the energy patterns.
And that sounds exactly what they're doing. And I wonder if they're harvesting this energy. Like, I wonder if somehow they can contain the energy on their ship, or you said their being, so within their bodies, and maybe transfer this energy elsewhere.
Well, I believe that they're probably feeding off of it.
Okay.
This is how.
Well, yeah. If what you're saying is true, if they're living beings, then yeah, they're probably coming here to feed through the energy sources.
Right, and that east side of South Mountain where this power plant sits today, where I was seeing those lights at, was the major city for the Hohokam. The Hohokam lived in that spot right there, and there were cemeteries. There were cemeteries all along that area. And now there's houses and golf courses there, and a lot of people to this day don't understand what they're living on and playing golf on.
Right.
But it was all on the east side, and they tried to live as close as they could to these beings. So a lot of people were watching me film all these things up until the summer solstice. Now we're getting ready to come into this next equinox. I think of September 21st.
Yeah, that sounds
22nd,
about right.
23rd. Yeah, we're coming up to it. And now these things, when people follow me on Facebook, they're seeing me. Now they're starting to come back. They're slowly starting to come back to this area because the sun and the earth is moving along. And after the 23rd, these things will be back in the sky here like crazy, right here in this area.
Actually,
now,
yeah,
unfortunately,
the equinox will take place Wednesday. Wait, no, I was looking at something else. Sorry, continue. I was looking for what date the equinox will be on, and just the spring popped up.
Yeah, I think it's the 22nd.
23rd.
23rd. Okay.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
pretty much right.
Yeah. So and as soon as after that happens, then give or take a few days, maybe a week later after that, these things will start coming back. And then when the next equinox and solstice comes around, they're going to move. They're going to go somewhere else.
Yes.
So
We
it's
should.
crucial.
It'd be nice if we can somehow contact or get in touch with people along this energy line around the world and follow the dates and the sightings, and maybe people out there listening to the show can follow these certain dates, follow the path of the sun, and look up into the sky.
Yes, and that's the whole purpose. I mean, I have accomplished so much in these last 20 years that a lot of people just didn't understand. But I took the time and the patience and the research and the field work. I mean, I've done this for so long. I really uncovered a lot of secrets here, and this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to inform the public that look, this is how you can predict them. This is how you can follow them. And everything has to do with the fault lines around the earth, with the energy, and whether it's man-made energy such as nuclear power plants, or if it's regular earth energy such as fault lines and ley lines and things, and volcanoes and things like that, and the sun, and the solstice,
they're
the
all
equinox
feeding
and
sources.
the solstice. Right, it all connects together, and this is the reason why the ancient ones were so into worshiping the sun, because the sun had everything to do with these things in the sky. They're gods.
Very true. And also, it seems like most of our modern religions are still symbolically based on those ancient sun religions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Hohokams were sky watchers, much like I am, and they understood the sky. They understood the spirits of the earth and sky. Now they don't say crafts; they say spirits, and this is neat too, because when they come down, because when Dave was talking to me, when the shaman was telling me, look, these are doorways. I'm thinking, how can a big technical spaceship get into a little crack like that in the side of a boulder, until I actually saw it, and it wasn't a craft at all. That these things were entities, they were alive, they were spirits, they were ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's some kind of supernatural thing. Just as man is higher than the animals, these things are higher than man. So it tells us in these biblical scrolls. It tells us that these things are here. All right. So, and I understand why the natives call these things spirits. It's because when they start to absorb themselves into the stone, you can see through them. You can see through them as like a ghost. Now, they make no shadows. They make no sound. When they're high in the sky, they're solid. They're shape-shifting. They're changing colors. They're flashing different colors. They're brilliant. They're beautiful.
Right.
When they come down on the mountain, you can see through them, and then they absorb themselves into the rock. I have filmed this many times. These things coming and going from South Mountain, in and out of the mountain, leaving the mountain.
Right. And like you said, there are different colors, which colors are just different frequencies of light. And through some research, spirits are just beings of light.
Right. And it also tells us that Satan is the demon of light. He's a beautiful angel. And that's exactly what's going on here. Now, some of these scrolls do tell us that the great creator has used these things to help mankind in the past before. Now, we can find the evidence in the book of Numbers and the book of Exodus. A pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. There's UFOs all over the Old Testament when we actually examine these scrolls. It tells us what these things are. It even tells us that, Ezekiel has a dream with this guy with wings.
Yeah, and Ezekiel's chariot is describing like some kind of flying entity.
Right, a wheel within a wheel, and he's talking about beings. He's talking about 4 living creatures, man.
Right?
Not a spaceship, but somebody with wings. And when we look at the Anunnaki, they're depicting beings with wings. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And what about the Moses leading the people out of Egypt? Okay, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, but sometimes that thing in the sky would sit there for a whole year. would not move.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the people would pitch tent and wait for that thing to move. And when they started to move, then they started following this thing again. It even tells us that when Moses went into the tent, this thing came down. This thing
and also
down from the sky.
When
Moses
got the tablets of the law at the time, he had to climb up the mountain by himself, and that's all these entities are somehow.
And the lights were there.
They're flying around the mountain. Yeah.
Yes, the light was there, and it took Moses up. All right, was it a phoenix light? Was it a phoenix light that Moses was talking to in the bush?
Right.
Could be, And why was it a cow that these people made as their god? Why did they make a cow? Because when Moses was up on the mountain, so were the demons. The demons were in the sky also. These fallen angels were in the sky also. And when you look at the petroglyphs tells us that they look like serpents. They look like animals. They look like deers. They look like sheep. They look like bulls. Okay, they're different type of creatures in the sky. And so when Moses didn't come down from the mountain, the people were afraid, but they said, hey, Moses isn't our God. Look at that creature in the sky. Look at the magic he can do. This is our God. Let's make an image in his image. Let's make an idol in his image.
And who knows, maybe that flying entity told them to do so as well.
That could be. Yeah. That could be. There's so many parts that are left out of the Bible, that are left out of the biblical scrolls, which is really sad, because it tells us, let us make man in our image. Well, who the hell is us, and who the hell is our, what is going on here? It doesn't say, hey, man, I'm making man in my image, dude. That's what's up. No, it says.
Well, it says the man in our image too. So
now, when we look at the Anunnaki tablets, when we read the Anunnaki and the biblical and the Babylonian scrolls, it tells us who we are. It tells us who our is.
Exactly.
It tells us.
And speaking of biblical text too, what do you think of Enoch? Enoch, who supposedly did not die, but went up into heaven before he died,
right.
Which that sounds like an alien abduction possibly, or something like that.
Sure. And he talks about this cube, and then, at the end of days, what does it say? It says that this cube will come down from the sky and will land out there on the holy rock, so, and that's when things are going to change. Well, a lot of people will think, oh, it's a spaceship. It's a craft. What if it's something else?
Yeah, what if it's a fallen entity?
Well, this one isn't. This one, according to prophecy, isn't. This one is going to be, the cube of the Lord, and this is when it's going to land on that rock out there, and that's when, when we studied the biblical text, a lot of people would say that Earth is heaven. And after everything is done and over with, we will be living back here on earth because this will be our heaven.
Oh, yeah, that's what they call the New Jerusalem?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it, brother. You got it. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't understand this. Or they don't want to understand this because they think, oh, it's religion, dude. Well, let's just take a religion out of this. And let's look at it as a history book.
Right. Well, a lot of people look at the bad doings of religious leaders and take that as the whole entire religion itself.
Yeah, and the book of Timothy was completely left out because it tells us that we don't have to go to church to worship God. And the Catholic Church doesn't want that in there.
Right. Well, the Bible, they kept the verse of the Bible, I forget exactly where this is at, but it says the kingdom of heaven is within you. So sure. Right there says you don't need to go to church.
That's right, man. That's right. But, we got atheists out there, and we got, people looking for little green guys from Alpha Centauri trying to make money off other people, and that's the problem. They're not looking at the true history here. They're not looking at what's really going on and what history says about these things and what archaeology says about these things.
Yeah, I think archaeology is one of the true sciences of the world right now. I mean, it's one of the main things leading us to the path back to truth.
That's right.
And I think it's a hard struggle for a lot of people in today's society because a lot of people cannot cipher what's real and what's not real when they have so many different negative influences around them.
You know, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls and they started reading about the Essenes, you know how they verified that the ruins at the bottom of the Dead Sea, where the mountains are, were actually the Essenes town. Do you know how they verified that?
How they verify that?
Oh my goodness! Because it says in the tablets that their bathroom should be like a few hundred feet away from their houses. Mm-hmm. Well, they went down to the ruins and they measured where the bathrooms were, and that's how they verified that these ruins is the Essenes, and this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written at. It's archaeology.
Yeah, very
dude.
nice.
It's proof.
Yeah, there's biblical text proving that the Dead Sea Scrolls are accurate and verify things within the Bible itself. But a lot of people, a lot of Christians out there, they do not want to accept the Dead Sea Scrolls as biblical canon at all.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the saddest.
I think it possibly might be part of the big cover-up.
Oh, sure, man, sure. That is the biggest cover-up of all time, is that these things are real, that these things are part of our history. Mm-hmm. And archaeology, verifies all this, but there's still yet that, still won't just take the evidence from where it's at. So sad.
This research coincides a lot with my last show. I had a I had a fellow archaeologist / researcher on named Roger Spur, and he's come across this concept of mud fossil research, and he's taking the muddy top layer of the earth and has found evidence that the earth crust is full of the dead fossilized bodies of giants all over the world.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
It's crazy. Like he has a theory that do you know the Devil's Tower National Park? He thinks that is a giant's foot fossilized sticking out of the ground. And he also thinks through his biology research that the giants were full of gold because the human body has traces of gold, but a giant's body would have a lot more gold traces in it. So he thinks where that giant there in Devil's Tower laid and died, that the gold rushed to like the heel of that foot, and there should be a lot of gold underneath Devil's Tower right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've even heard stuff saying the Devil's Tower is actually a giant tree.
Oh, really? That's a part of a giant tree stump or something?
Right. Yeah, that's been fossilized.
Well, some biblical researchers say that like prior to the flood, the plant life and all wildlife and on the world was huge compared to what it is today. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too. That flood story. We have the same flood story out here in Phoenix. A lot of people. There's a mountain out here on the east side of Phoenix called the Superstition. Okay. Now, a lot of people think of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine that's out there, but this mountain actually has a whole bigger past, a whole bigger story of how that mountain was created. Now, it says the Indians say they talk about when the flood was coming to wipe out the giants and all the bad people on the earth, that the lead giant, told his people to run up on this boulder. Mm-hmm. And because he was going to raise this boulder, he didn't want his people to drown. So as the water was coming, the lead giant used his powers and he raised this boulder up, but the water kept coming. So he used his powers again and he raised this mountain up, but the water kept coming. The water kept coming so much, he raised this boulder into a huge mountain until he couldn't do it anymore. Oh, wow. And to immortalize his people and save them from a watery death, in his last bit of strength, he turned them all to stone. And when he did that, the water then stopped. And to this day, you can see high up on top of the Superstition Mountains, all the giants that have been turned to stone up there. And right below their feet is the water line where the flood had stopped. And then all along the bottom of the Superstition Mountains, you can see other giants that have been turned to stone. There's a mountain out here in Phoenix called Camelback Mountain. And there's a giant that has been turned to stone there also up on the mountain there. So when we look at Bryce Canyon in Utah, all those are giants that were turned to stone.
See, and that is going along with Roger Spurr's research, where these giants turn to stone, and a lot of the surface of the earth is comprised of those stone giants. It's crazy stuff that people don't realize. People think that these mountains are just normal geology, they're just normal rocks, but I think it goes way beyond that. I'll send you some photos that Roger has of his own personal research, where he's found a huge stone that looks like a kidney, and he cut it open, and it still has all the same colors of a normal kidney would have.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's weird because like somehow these mud fossils preserved the inside of whatever body part that was, and you can still see all the colorized insides of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
But yeah, let's continue our discussion about the Arizona lights. Is there any current sightings that you've had? Are they picking back up again now?
Well, I just filmed something a couple days ago. It went over our apartment complex. I saw something, but I wasn't able to get it on film prior to that, a couple days before that. So yeah, we're getting ready to reach this September 23rd. So yeah, they're starting to come back slowly but surely. I did film some lights far out there in Paradise Valley, and that was pretty neat. It was neat on how these lights just appeared in the sky that way. And so yeah, I mean, just because they're not in this area doesn't mean that they're not somewhere else, because like I said, they're following the sun and they're following the energy.
Right, so they're definitely somewhere else in the world. If
right,
yeah, if they're not in Arizona or somewhere else, then they're still somewhere else on the planet.
That's right. And you know, this is their planet too. A lot of people fail to understand this, but this is their world also. They're not from another planet. This is their home also. You know, it's interesting that SETI and all these other space researchers are looking for life on outskirts of the planet, when I think they should start looking in their own backyard, because it's been here the whole time. You know, so these beings have always been here, and archaeology and traditions and history tells us this. It tells us that these things have always been here. This is part of our history, and soon it will be again part of our future.
Yeah, and it's definitely been part of our history. Like, look back at medieval paintings of even like the crucifixion. There are UFOs above the crosses there during the crucifixion paintings of the medieval times.
Yeah, you know, and you really have to, because I understand art, you know, being an archaeology of these petroglyphs, you have to understand the art, and you have to understand what the artist is trying to say. You know, so let's, for instance, like when we look at a painting with Jesus, now it has a halo above his head.
Okay,
now, does Jesus really have a halo above his head? No. The artist is wanting us to understand that this guy is holy because he has a halo over his head.
Yeah, so that's it's a symbol.
Right, yeah. So when a biblical artist is trying to describe something in the sky, he's not going to put a flying banana in the sky. You know, he's going to probably make it look like some kind of spaceship, because that's the only thing that people to this day will understand is nuts and bolts crap. So he will paint something that we will understand, but actually it's not. It's an entity that looks like a flying banana or a flying raisin or a flying cow or something like that, you know? So he's trying to make us understand what he's trying to talk about.
Now, what do you think of like the old, the medieval painting I was speaking of? It looks like a flying craft, and they didn't have have airplanes but they didn't have mechanisms back then that we have today to make the human understand what that is. You know what I mean?
I think that he was trying to put in that there was a human inside this entity.
Oh, okay.
Now out here we have barbells. We have lots of barbells, carvings, and I found barbells here in Phoenix, Arizona many a times. And it shows, there's one petroglyph that shows this barbell actually consuming a man. And this barbell is around this human, and the human is looking out a window. And he's taking this guy up into the sky. Now, it's not necessarily saying that this barbell is a ship, but this entity has absorbed this man and is taking him up into the sky.
Oh,
but
wow.
a lot of people will mistaken this because they're familiar with Hollywood. They're familiar with, the spaceship went over the city of Phoenix in 1997. They're familiar with little green guys, fire in the sky, all this, nonsense. And they say, it's a spaceship because that's what we were taught. Actually, it's not. This is a new theory. This is a new understanding of what these things are. Mm-hmm. All right. A lot of people, because they didn't understand this, because they don't look at the biblical scrolls, because they don't understand the petroglyphs, automatically assume that these are spaceships, that these are nuts and bolts technology, little green men from Alpha Centauri. This is what they have been told for the last over 100 years. But in fact, it's actually could be something different. And this is the whole new information that I brought to the UFO community in 2005. Nobody has ever said this ever before until after my stuff in 2005. This is all new to a lot of people.
It sure is. You're definitely mentioning a lot of new things I haven't heard. I've never personally heard the concept of UFOs not being a nuts and bolts machine, but a living being. That's some very interesting evidence of, like what you're saying, biblical scrolls, and in a world that we live in nowadays, that might be hard for some people to hear.
It is, and it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing because, I'm sure a lot seem to want to believe that these things are here to help us, but we really have to examine the past. We have to examine the history here. And the history says it's not a good thing. When man interacted with these things, each time, each world, man has come up missing. And it wasn't just the Hohokams, but it was, other tribes around the world that came up missing at the exact same time.
Yeah,
the exact same time.
That's not a coincidence.
And absolutely. And, the history just talks about these things in the sky came down and interacted with man, and man was fooled. And this is what I believe they have planned in store for us again. This is the reason why they're in the sky. They're not coming down interacting with us because it's not time yet, and man does not need them. But when man needs them once again to survive, let's say that the air is full of radiation, that the water is contaminated, there's no food, there's no water, but yet they see a light in the sky. And one comes down and he shapeshifts and he turns himself into a man and he says, look what I can do. I can clean up the air. I can make it breathable. I can clean up the water. I can give you food. In return, worship me. I am your God. And it's going to start all over again.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people that are biblical describe something like that happening, definitely in the end times, where, like, I don't know, is it something considered like the false prophet or something like that comes down?
The Antichrist.
Yeah, that's what it is, the Antichrist.
Sure. And a lot of people think the Antichrist is going to be a man, but what if it's one of these entities that we're seeing in the sky today?
Right.
Because that's what the petroglyphs are talking about. The petroglyphs talk about these things turning into man. Now, it's interesting, too, because when we look at the petroglyphs out here, we see what some Native Americans like to call the lizard man. Okay, now they call this guy the lizard man because he has a tail. But in between, in his belly, is this round circular object, this orb, if you will. Mm-hmm. And some Native Americans will say, well, that tummy is him inside of the world, halfway in his world and halfway out of our world. But actually, when I'm watching these things for over 20 years and seeing what they can do and seeing them shapeshift, I've seen them come out of a light in the sky, shapeshift into a snake, shapeshift into a man with a horn. Okay, I videotaped this in the sky. I can honestly say that little circle tummy in this belly of this petroglyph of this lizard man is the orb that we're seeing in the sky today. And this orb is turning himself into a man. Now, there's petroglyphs out here of these lizard men with these belly orbs, huge, and a regular human man standing next to it. And this guy is a giant. Wow. He's a giant compared to the humans.
Yeah.
So these things are huge. So was this the giant of the Nephilim that the biblical scrolls are talking about? It could be.
Yeah,
because
and
these things are huge.
And there are things called watchers and various spiritual groups that are out there, and they seem to usually be associated with the Anunnaki. I think the watchers are what most of these ancient cultures or even current spiritual groups that are not mainstream are talking about, and they're watching the world like what you said. And I don't either they're waiting to come down at the perfect moment, like you're saying with the Antichrist, or maybe they're coming down to prevent us from destroying ourselves.
Yeah, it's funny too, because every time that war starts to escalate on the earth, that's when these things really start to appear in quantities, in mass. We see mass sightings. World War II, the pilots was saying these things were the Foo Fighters, and then it didn't realize that it wasn't. They thought it was the enemy's planes, but then later on they come to find out that it wasn't. President Reagan talks about these things. What if there was an alien threat from above? Wouldn't everybody in the world want to unite against these things? So yeah, these things have always been here. The government has always known these things have been here, and it's not for a good thing.
Right.
It's not for a good thing.
Do you think maybe that? Well, I personally think the one world government has been going on for a while now, and I've wondered if there is a one world government, whoever's in charge of the whole world has been in contact for a long time with these beings, and they're just planning for the right moment. Like the whole world, like the end time scenario has already been kind of like in the process, like scripted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories on how the secret government is in contact with the beast, with these things in the sky. Mm-hmm. Who knows? It could be true. I mean, I find carvings of the Freemasons on tombs out here on South Mountain. So yeah,
I've read a lot about Freemasons, and also I've read that the American Freemasonry came from Europe, but before it came into America, they traveled through South America up into America. Mm-hmm. So they might have laid their symbols during their journey around in Arizona on these temples, because they were talking to these tribes along the way to America.
It's interesting too, man. When you look on my YouTube page, my first one, Petroglyphs in the Sky, I have two of them. You can actually see, if you're ever here in Phoenix, Arizona, check out the pyramid that's over there by the zoo. It's next to Hole in the Rock Mountain. Okay. It's in the middle of the Phoenix Zoo in Hole in the Rock Mountain, and there's this pyramid tomb of the first governor of Phoenix, Arizona, and his whole family is buried underneath this pyramid of a Freemason.
Oh wow.
Right.
Yeah, no, there's probably a lot of Freemasonic connections there in Arizona. Is it called the Governor Hunt's pyramid tomb.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, that's it. See the pyramid?
Yeah. Wow.
It looks exactly what we see on the dollar bill.
It's weird too. Like I've had various pyramid experts on my show in the past, and there's a lot of weird energy involved with pyramids, different than what people really think. I don't think they were actual tombs in Egypt. They weren't made specifically for the dead.
Right. You know, the carvings out there in Egypt, you know, it talks about the giants putting these things together.
Right.
Matter of fact, the Sphinx has a tablet in between his paws, and it actually shows a giant next to the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is sitting on top of chambers underneath the ground. All right, so I don't believe that these things, the pyramids, were anything but tombs, but possible energy harnesses, a type of energy conductor.
Oh, exactly. That's what I personally think, and I've talked to a lot of renowned researchers that have speculated the same idea. They were almost like energy generators.
Right. Even the Ark of the Covenant. Now that was a type of conductor, an energy conductor.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Very interesting stuff. I mean, it's just ancient technology is a lot more powerful and complicated than people realize.
Sure. And what about the Baghdad battery, man? I mean, come on. They were using batteries back then, and where's the soot on the pyramids? All these carvings, but we don't find any soot because they had light bulbs, man. They had electricity back then. You know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if they can generate power using, some say maybe magnetic forces combined with the pyramid design, generating energy, you can definitely create electricity.
And it's interesting too, because you know, over there in Mexico and some other parts of the world, we see clay tablets, or we see clay statues in the depiction of a man in a spacesuit. Now, I believe that man back in the day was able to get to the heavens, was able to get to the stars, was able to get to the moon before us in 1963 or whatever that happened, 64.
Oh, definitely. So aren't there carvings? Either Egypt or some other ancient temple of the UFO too, or not even a UFO. I've seen like hieroglyphs of like helicopters and airplanes and stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff like that. I'm not too sure if that's credible or not.
Yeah, that could be recent.
Yeah. So I mean, I've looked seriously into that, and I'm just not convinced that it's credible. I don't know if it's real or not. But what is real is these statues of spacemen.
Actual statues, not carvings.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And look at the tomb that was on one of the that was in I believe it was the Sun Pyramid or the Moon Pyramid of Mexico, where it actually shows a Mayan, and he's in like this type of spacecraft, and it's got fire down below, and he's hanging on to controls, and he's got a breathing device in his nose, and it looks like he's getting ready to go up into space. Oh
yeah, no, that's the one I was speaking of, not a one in Egypt. I remember seeing this one then at the Sun Pyramid that you're speaking of now.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember seeing these a long time ago, and it blew my mind at that time, and it still does.
Sure, right. You know, and look at it. Let's look at it. It's not depicting a little green man alien, you know, with a big head and big eyes. No, it's showing a man.
Yeah.
It's a man. And where did they get this technology from? Where did they get this information from? But from these things in the sky.
Right.
Because it tells us that these things taught the people of that day the secret knowledge of the universe, the secrets that man was not meant to know about. So they were taught on how to reach the heavens, how to reach space. You know, so they were taught the secret knowledge.
And it's weird, like some of these Mayan astronaut carvings and statues, their space helmets they look like serpent helmets, which go along with what you're speaking of over in Arizona with these carvings or petroglyphs of these serpents.
Right. Well, it's not just here in Phoenix. It's mostly in Mexico too. You know,
right,
you're talking about the Quetzalcoatl, the
exactly.
flying serpent. You know, so there's even a pyramid out there where the equinox and the solstice shadows has this pyramid has this serpent crawl down the pyramid side. Now that's interesting too, because we have the exact same type of light and shadows out here during the equinox and the solstice on South Mountain. And it depicts these shadows cutting through spirals, or it depicts shadows of an Indian profile face. Okay, and it only occurs during the equinox and the solstice times when the sun is in the right position. Now, this is fascinating. How were the Indians able to chisel this rock in such a way to make these light and shadows precisely perfect on these days? Right. How is this possible, man? I mean, it must have taken them years to accomplish this.
Yeah, they had. It had to do with the pyramids or their temples that they're living in.
Right, man. You know, so it all makes sense that they were taught by these things of the earth and sky. They were taught by these spirits of the earth and sky. They were taught these entities, these beings, not something from outer space.
And I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous when most of the people around the world think that they were that they were just really primitive and they did not have the knowledge, when there's proof of it right now, right in front of you.
That's the archaeologists. You know, the archaeologists, they're trying to, I was the first one to actually bring the archaeologist out of his hiding here in Phoenix and talk about these things. Mm-hmm. You know, no one in UFO history has ever brought an archaeologist out on the news to talk about the glyphs on the rocks out here. That's never been done before.
Oh, you got a video of that?
My research did.
I'm gonna have to check that one out.
And he's saying something completely different. And when you look at him, you can see what the kind of people that I'm dealing with here.
Right.
You know, you can see that these are just morons, they're imbeciles, and they're controlled. They're controlled by somebody else higher than them. So they have to say this.
Yeah, they're controlled by academia. Academia right now does not want the truth to come out.
If we go out there and start uncovering these tombs, and that's the thing, I want at least one tomb uncovered. I want the archaeologists, I want ASU, I want the people of the city of Phoenix to go out there and open up one tomb to verify that there is something in there. I mean, it's obvious that there is tombs out there on South Mountain. So I'm not saying open up all of them. Let's just open up one and see what's there. But see, they are afraid. They are afraid because when they do, they will soon realize that that the history that they have been teaching all these people, the wrong history for over 80 years, you know, will come forth and be something completely different. Because what if there's a giant in there? What if there's something else that's in there that doesn't consist of what the archaeologist has been letting us to believe in all these history books? This will change the history of Phoenix and change the history of the world, and they do not want this to happen.
Yeah, exactly you right now are on the cusp of something insanely huge, my friend. I mean, right in your backyard is evidence that would change our whole reality as a society.
It's very big. It's very big, and it's not just my opinion. I have history backing me up here. I have the Native Americans. I have the petroglyphs. I have the first park ranger. I have the tombs out there that has been photographed and documented. Okay, this is real. This is what's really here in Phoenix. This is our history. It's not some peace-loving tribe called the Hohokams that were here one day and moved somewhere else because it got too hot here. No, man, this is completely different. This is a completely different, proven history that has been covered up at least for the last 80 years after Charles Holbrook died.
And for the listeners out there, that tells you why those black helicopters were out there monitoring everything going on with you, Jeff.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. The truth cannot be told, and if it does, your life will be threatened.
Well, you know, that's one thing too. I have never ever. I mean, all the cable shows I've done, all the articles I have written, all the things I've done in the newspaper, all the books that have been published, the books that have been published about me and my findings, um, all the radio shows that I've done. I have not once been ever threatened by any of these people, so-called and men in black, or anything like that. They simply watch me from the sky. Yeah, I agree to that, dude. I've proven that. I've seen it. I've noticed that. Yeah.
Right.
Black helicopters and the white airplanes. Yeah, dude. But they're not breaking into my house, trying to steal my information. They're not trying to threaten me, saying, you better shut up, boy, or something bad's going to happen to your family. No, nothing of that. Nothing of like
Well,
that has
that's
ever
probably
taken
because
place.
right now you do not hold any pieces of information in your public place of existence, your housing, that the public can't go out there and witness for themselves. If you had something right now that you were in possession of, let's say something within that tomb, I think the story might be a little bit different.
That could be true, and that's the reason why I photographed all the evidence, and I photographed all the evidence in the library, and I put it in my book, and I put it in there, and I say this is what can be found on South Mountain. So I'm bringing the people, the people back to the mountain. You know, I'm bringing this information out that hasn't been talked about in 80 years. You know, so I'm bringing the information to you. Now it's up to somebody else. I wish I could go in there and dig up the tombs. Yeah, but I'm not that. I'm not the guy. I know that I'm only a messenger bringing this information out. There's somebody else out there who is gonna go out there and call my bluff, and I can't wait. And they're gonna dig up something, and they're gonna prove something spectacular, something wonderful.
Yes, and
I
hopefully
just hope. I hope that I'm around to see it.
it would be exciting if somehow that person did like a Facebook live video of him opening up that tomb.
Oh man, that would be so cool.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is, you know, once you open up a tomb, you're gonna have to let it air out at least for a week, because that's what happened to Carter in the Egyptian when he dug up King Tut, because those spores. There's spores. There's mold in there, and that's exactly what killed Carter. It wasn't some curse of King Tut, but it was actually the mold that was in the tomb.
Imagine how much of that concentrated spore is in the air when you open it up. That'd be insane.
I know, right? Right, yeah. So, and the thing of it is, this one tomb that I'm kind of talking about, it's depicting a lizard man, a dead lizard man, inside this tomb. That's what it's showing. So it'd be great if someone could open up this tomb and actually find some kind of skeletal remains of a giant, or even some of these special weapons that we haven't got a chance to talk about yet, that is buried not only here on South Mountain, but around the world.
That's interesting and intriguing. We just got a few more minutes, Jeff. Do you want to cover some of those weapons real quick, or do you want to save that for another time?
Well, it's interesting. You know, some of these petroglyphs, now the petroglyphs depict these bow and arrow men, these Hohokam people with their bows and arrows, shooting at flying serpents in the sky, shooting at the phoenix light, shooting at orbs in the sky. And not only were they doing it, it was like some kind of war. Not only were they doing it, but they had another being, another living being, another life form. All right. Now, this entity had like 4 arms. Now, when we look at the India legends, when we look at the India paintings, we can see that some of these creatures have many arms. They're depicting many arms. And that's exactly what this is depicting over here, that there was another race of beings, another race of entities that was on the Hohokam side, going to war with these serpents of the earth and sky. And they have these magical staff weapons. The petroglyphs, you can see it on my Facebook page, on my website.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It shows it shows one holding like a giant orb, like you mentioned, and you got this guy with the magic staff next to him.
Sure, and he's shooting. What is he shooting at? a flying serpent,
in the
sky. So so the legends of the India legends say that the Viamaris went to war with these. There was like a war between the good entities and the bad entities, and mankind was their trophy. And obviously, the good entities won. Now, when it was all over with, these entities buried their weapons all over the world because they knew eventually they would have to come back and reuse them someday. So we should find these special weapons all over the world from this intergalactic war, I guess you could call it, some kind of spiritual war that occurred sometime in our history.
Yeah, and like you said, they're all over. They're probably at all these other ancient temples and pyramids around the world on the energy lines, the NASCAR lines of the world.
Sure, absolutely. Those lines are actually, when you follow those lines, those lines on those Nazca lines, it goes right into a canyon, into a spiral canyon, and then you find pottery shards at the base. So all these lines are going to places where these doorways are, where these entities come and go from.
Yeah, it's like if you look at these lines, it's like a treasure map. They'll take you to where you need to look.
Sure, right. You're not just supposed to look at the petroglyphs. You're supposed to include the whole landscape in with the glyphs, because it's not just graffiti. It's not just some kind of story. It's telling you what happened in that place. This is a carving testament. This is a proven photograph of what happened in that area. This is the reason why we find petroglyphs in one area, but we don't find petroglyphs in another area, because nothing happened over there. These petroglyphs are in a spot where the occurrence took place at. Now, if the petroglyphs say that there's a doorway here and these entities come and go, then this is the spot where you want to watch.
Oh yeah,
you want to watch for these entities here in that area.
Very true, and very interesting stuff. It's exciting hearing about your stories and what you've uncovered, because it gets me motivated to watch the skies, especially during the fall equinox coming up. I'm gonna be looking out myself.
Right, and start paying attention in January, February, and March. All right, so if you're living next to a mountain that's got spirals carved on it, or if you're living next to some kind of energy spot, such as a fault line or anything like that, keep your eyes open. Keep your cameras ready.
I live fairly close to a spiritual energy-centered place that some say is similar to Arizona. It's called Camp Chesterfield here in Indiana, and it's an old spiritual camp, or Madame Blavatsky campground, and it's where kind of one of the centers where the New Age movement started. And yeah, there's a big spiritual center there. I'm gonna have to go down there and during that time period to see if I see anything in the sky myself.
Right, and investigate the history there. Investigate what the Indians say. If there's any
there's a big Indian burial ground right there too.
Okay.
Yeah, huge Indian burial ground.
Right. So what you want to look for is spirals.
Okay.
And lizard men and things like that. Because not all rock art is talking about doorways. Not all mountains are holy mountains. Some mountains depict ceremonies, only ceremonies.
Okay.
Some mountains only depict hunting or gathering. All right, so it's the mountains and mostly.
That's probably what's going to be around where I'm at, because Indiana is a big hunter-gatherer area for the Indians.
Well, it's very possible.
Well, I guess that's all over though, but yeah.
Now, yeah, that's what you want to look for. If it's got spirals carved there, and it's got things coming out of the spirals or things touching the spirals, then yeah, that is a holy mountain, that is a sacred mountain, and that's a spirit mountain.
All right, I will definitely keep looking for that stuff, my friend. On that note, that does it for this evening, my friend. Jeff, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm glad you joined me on the show today.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. I look forward to speaking with you again in the future, and if you want to, you're more than welcome to come back on the show sometime and give us some updates on your future findings.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Take care, Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Jeff Woolwine from Phoenix, Arizona. He specializes in researching the petroglyphs over there, written on the side of South Mountain. And he's seen many UFO sightings above the mountain and above his own property over in Phoenix. So, as mentioned, keep an eye out in the sky. If you live close to any mountains around the world during September 23rd, which is the fall equinox, it seems to be where the sightings are more active during the equinoxes and the solstices. Seems like the beings up above are following the precession of the sun to get the energy. Seems like they feed off the energy. So keep your eye to the sky. You never know what you might find. I am Rodney McGillvary, your host of Ancient Mysteries Revisited in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Coming to you on WELT 95.7 FM and stream live at www.acpl.info/welt every Mondays and Wednesdays at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, we are the Deprogramming Program.